Hello everyone and welcome to TV Talks, the show where I take a look at both the good and the bad of what television has to offer. And let's go back down to Springfield, because it's been a while. So, Season 6. Pretty much the same crew and storytelling devices as Season 5. So, let's not really dwell on that too much. All we need to tell you is that the end of this caused a bit of controversy because of, not major controversy, and in fact, the good controversy. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay, let's start off with episode 1 of season 16, but really 104 overall. Bart of Darkness. So there's a heat wave going around in Springfield, and there's no way for the kids to keep cool until the Simpson family gets a pool. And that rhymes, and you know it rhymes, Marge. Bart tries to do something impressive, but ends up breaking his leg, and then he goes completely insane. And then in the last third, it turns into a Rear Window parody, and then he sees that Ned Flanders may have killed Maude Flanders. So this episode was funny at first, but then when I saw Rear Window about a few months ago, this episode got even funnier because now I get all the jokes. However, it's one of those parodies where it helps to know the source material, but it doesn't make or break it. Knowing the stuff that they're parodying certainly helps, but it doesn't change the outcome. All the stuff with Lisa becoming popular and then Martin trying to still be really cool at the very end, and also him trying not to get pantsed, all that stuff's great. Bart going insane is really fun. Homer with the chlorine is so great, especially because I've actually heard of the local pool actually doing something like that a few years back, which is really funny. The only slight complaint I have is that the Rear Window stuff kind of comes out of nowhere once the third act starts, but that's not really that much of a complaint. I mean, the episode's still really, really good, and definitely worth watching. It's just that little pacing issue, but like I said, not that much of an issue. Lisa's rival. There's a new girl that comes to Springfield, and she's basically Lisa, only younger and even better at all the things she does. Only, however, she's not conceited. But Lisa can't stand having someone be better than her, so she decides to do whatever she can to make sure that she's either on the same level, or when it comes to the end, dethrone her. Winona Ryder guest stars as Alex, the new girl, and she does a very good job. Very impressed. That's all I really have to say about it. Lisa's character can be a little irritating here, in some regard. I mean, on one hand, she's not letting this girl have any sort of success or prosperity or anything. She has to be number one. But here's the thing. That's her. She's used to getting all this stuff, all this mindless praise and all this attention. And because Bart is really popular doing all the stuff he does, she has her own little group that makes her somewhat popular there. But now that this girl is taking everything, what's she gonna be? She's kind of nothing. And I personally side in that camp, which is the camp that is the way bigger one. The antics are very funny and it's all really good, but what makes it is actually the subplot. While not getting a ton of focus, it's really funny. Homer takes 500 pounds of sugar from an overturned truck and then tries to guard it, but all these bees and stuff try to come after it and the rain melts it. I don't know why, it's just so simple, but it's really funny, it's really effective. You're gonna hear me say that a lot, that it's simple, but it's funny. That's what this season has to offer for the most part. A lot of simple but effective comedy. And it really shows here. When you get down to it, everything's really simple with the exception of the Telltale Heart parody. But it all works really well. And of course, Ralph gets a whole bunch of stuff that he's known for, like that, "What's a diorama?" and "I been my Wookie." And of course, the famous, "My cat's breath smells like cat food." Another thing you're going to notice is that a lot of Ralph's super popular phrases come from this season. I'll point them out as we go along. Another Simpsons clip show, and the title just basically describes how everybody feels about this episode. Another Simpsons clip show. And I agree. They didn't really want to make another clip show, but they kind of had to. I mean, it's a good way to save money. And you know how much money they saved? I don't know, but it's surely enough because they just only used recycled clips for this thing. Not a single frame of animation in this entire episode is new. And if that wasn't bad enough, this clip show has a theme. Now, themes aren't bad in clip shows, it's kind of nice, but the thing is, it doesn't really work. It's kind of vague, it's romance. Okay. But none of the clips they choose are, like, amazing, really, for the most part. I mean, there are some great ones, like from Last Temptation to Homer, but for the most part, you don't need this. It just kind of feels superfluous. And much like the word superfluous, it's way longer than it should be and overcomplicated. The episode isn't bad, but I gave the first clip show a pass because, you know, every show can has to do it. It's a rite of passage, but this one just felt even lazier. Not that big on it, but hopefully the next one will be better. Oh look, it's Itchy and Scratchy Land. This one is way better. This is one of the most popular ones ever, especially if you go to Universal Studios Orlando or California. You will see half of this episode get played while you're waiting for the Simpsons ride. Not kidding, half of it gets played, and it's a lot of fun. So the whole family decide to go to Itchy and Scratchy Land, and they basically just kind of mess around there. It's basically their little parody of Disneyland, as you can tell, with a lot of stuff going on. Like the rejected characters, the Fantasia and Pinocchio parodies, the Parents Island stuff, all that kind of stuff. Then at the end it turns into a giant robot fight with all these Itchy and Scratchy robots trying to kill the family, but it makes for some good comedy. This one is not as simple as the other episodes previously, or the ones to come. This one is probably the most out there Simpsons episode so far, if you don't include the Treehouse of Horror. Because, well, robots attacking everything is certainly something the show hasn't really done before. But it works here. It's action-packed and exciting, yet also mixing in a lot of comedy. Although I do have to admit, the better parts are the ones where they're just kind of messing around. Which is funny, because normally the second act is the weakest part of a story. But that's not the case here. The second act has no real story, but it's just kind of joke after joke after joke at going such a fast pace that you don't even really care. And you know what? That's good enough for me. Itchy and Scratchy Land is a classic, and for good reason. Sideshow Bob Roberts. So, as we all know, Sideshow Bob is my favorite character of the show, and this one's about Sideshow Bob running for mayor. Oh wow, I also really like politics. Politics is something I study a lot. And hey, this ought to be a good one, right? Yes, it is. So, Mayor Quimby is an awful mayor, we all know that, but for once the Simpsons actually have to defend him because Sideshow Bob is running for mayor against him. And of course, we all know that Sideshow Bob is crazy and will most assuredly make the Simpsons miserable. Like trying to bulldoze their house to build the Matlock Expressway. Or having a Bart and Selma killing policy. Homer's okay with the last one, though. So the race is on for the Simpson kids to try to defend Mayor Quimby and make sure he gets reelected before Sideshow Bob wins in a sweeping margin, because he very clearly does. And then the second half is them trying to get rid of Bob and trying to find out what went wrong. And thanks to an anonymous whistleblower, they find out that the election had some very shady stuff going on. So, yes, this one is very well done. Sideshow Bob is at the forefront here, and this is one of his best appearances since Cape Fear, which, to be fair, was the last one, but still. This one has been kind of overlooked when it comes to Sideshow Bob episodes, but I think it's really well done. It parodies both political parties' mindsets very well, with even Sideshow Bob's campaign ad being a parody of the Michael Dukakis revolving door prison commercial. And Mayor Quimby just having a bunch of empty promises and come on arguments, that kind of stuff. This is what I love about The Simpsons. Unlike stuff like King of the Hill or Family Guy, which very clearly have a certain agenda, this attacks everybody, and it makes everybody feel bad, but it also makes them feel good at the same time, because they do it in a fun way. And of course there's that, stay out of Riverdale. That's classic. But one thing I actually kind of have to note is that aside from Sideshow Bob's Bart and Selma killing policies and the Matlock Expressway thing being a little dubious, I think he would actually be a good mayor. Aside from those few things, I think he would actually be pretty good. At least better than Quimby. And Quimby, you don't really have to try that hard to be better than. But, oh well, c'est la vie. Treehouse of Horror 5 is one of the most famous Treehouse of Horrors, and you'll see why in just a minute. First of all, the first segment is The Shinin', not The Shining. It's The Shinin'. Do you want to get sued? It's all one big parody of The Shining, with Homer being the dad, Bart being the kid, Groundskeeper Willie being the groundskeeper, whose name is not Willie. So Mr. Burns cuts off the TV and beer, and then a whole bunch of memes were born, and yeah, this one's just a classic. But I do feel like I need to talk about it, because even though it's a classic, I have to put in my words. Again, like the Rear Window parodies early on, it's still really funny when you don't know the thing, but once you've seen it, it's even funnier, and this is most surely the case, because last Halloween I saw The Shining for the first time, and now this is the first time I've seen the episode since I saw the movie, and it's even funnier, because of all the jokes they make poking fun at the movie, or the writing that Stephen King made. It's all a blast. Time and Punishment is another classic, with Homer trying to fix a toaster, but it keeps sending him into alternate realities, and no matter how much he tries, he cannot fix everything and make it come back to normal. I want to talk about this one as little as I can, mostly because talking about it gives away all the jokes. This is one that has no real story, but it's just joke after joke after joke after joke. Which is weird, because the middle segment is normally considered the worst, but I actually consider this tied with the first one. Nothing against the third one, but we'll get to that in a minute. This episode is non-stop hilarity all the way through, and that's all I can really say without giving away all the jokes. My favorite one being where Homer comes to the world that's perfect, and then it seems like it's all perfect, but then it's not, and then it actually kind of is, and then he ends up giving it up. That one was great. So, Nightmare Cafeteria. All the school gets overcrowded, so the teachers decide to eat their students. This is a perfect plot for a Treehouse of Horror, and the execution's very good. Now, I know I kind of knocked it earlier, but it's just in comparison, this is probably the weakest of the three, but that's not by much. It's still very well done. And it's actually kind of creepy in some parts, which is what very few Treehouse of Horror segments so far have actually been able to do. It's very well done, has some nice atmosphere, and some pretty good jokes here and there. What more do you want from Treehouse of Horror? Now this one, I will say, is the best, again, because these ones just keep getting better and better and better each time. But there will come a day where the Treehouse of Horrors end up getting worse and worse and worse until you get to that one that had the Coraline one, to the point where I almost fell asleep through it. Yeah, that's coming in a little while, but we got a little bit of ways for that one. Bart's girlfriend. So, Meryl Streep guest stars, and I could actually barely recognize her in this role. She does a very good job at kind of disguising herself. I mean, she doesn't really put on that much of a voice, but it is different from her normal speaking one. So, Bart is attracted to Reverend Lovejoy's daughter, but it turns out she's an even bigger troublemaker than he is. She's all about harmful pranks. Now, Bart does do harmful ones here and there, but she's actively malicious about it, and whenever Bart tries to break it off, it never works, to the point where she ends up framing him for stealing from the church collection plate. And then Bart has to prove his name. This episode is very well done. It's one of the better Bart episodes, I'd say. We get to see the more sensitive side of Bart, where he actually finds a girl he legitimately likes. Not just physically attracted to, but he legitimately likes her and sees her as a good person. And so he tries desperately to be like this goody two-shoes boy, and that is just so funny how we get to see how Bart looks at these pathetic suck-up kids, and it's really funny. Then, when it turns out it was all for nothing, they do make an actually good couple until she takes it a bit too far. And of course, the stuff with the collection plate, it's not overly mean-spirited because we know Bart's innocent, and that's kind of the whole point of the thing, is that they're trying to set him straight. And we also see just how quick people are to accuse people of doing stuff, which we can certainly see this day and age. This has some standout jokes here, like Lisa's line of saying, "I eat Fruit Loops for breakfast." There's also Bart and Jessica eating ice cream in front of the workout facility. And one of my favorite jokes in the entire show, top 10 easily, is when Bart hears what he thinks is Jessica singing, and Lisa tells him, "Don't go in, Bart, it's a trap." And he's like, "No, I can't. She's luring me in with her siren song." He runs into the church, and it's Ned Flanders singing in this really high-pitched, girly voice. I always laugh out loud every time whenever I see that. It is great. The whole thing makes for a lot of really good stuff. It's got a good story, it's got good character development, and good humor. This is one of the most perfect episodes so far in the season. But will it get topped? We'll have to see. Lisa on ice. So Lisa gets an academic alert that she's falling behind in gym, so she joins a hockey team, and she actually excels. Bart, however, is actually on another team, and then they have to duke it out to see who will be the favorite and the best hockey star. This one has a lot of humor at first, then turns into a story one. You see, a lot of hockey jokes and sports jokes are made, especially how Lisa just cannot get into any sort of sport team at all. But then midway through, it just kind of turns into a story one. Now that's not bad. That's not bad at all. I mean, the story works very well, and the humor works very well. It's just, again, like Bart of Darkness, the transition is a little bumpy. And before we move on, this has the most famous Ralph Wiggum line ever. "I won! "No, Ralph, this means you're failing English."
"Me fail English? That's impossible."
Yep, this is the episode where it debuts. And yes, it's really funny. Like I said, it does two things very well. It's just the transition in between them doesn't work as well. But I'd say it's worth it. Despite that minor error, it does work very well. Especially when you get to the very sweet ending that not just Lisa, but also Bart has. So far, we've seen quite a bit of character development with Bart. Whether it be in Bart's girlfriend or in this one, or actually even coming up here. I consider it worth it, and I suggest you check it out. Homer Badman. Okay, I had a lot to say about this one at first, but thanks to the mysterious Mr. Enter, I can't say anything about it without stealing from his review because he talked about it so much. Okay, so Homer and Marge attend a candy convention, and then Homer gets this rare gummy Venus de Milo. Well, not so much gets it as he does steal it. Then he's gonna take the babysitter home, but he accidentally touches her inappropriately, and then this turns into this big media scandal, and tell me that this is not accurate to how people portray it. And like what people have been saying at the time, this was written as cartoonishly over the top, but what's scary is that every single thing they do in here has happened in real life, whether it be to a political figure, a celebrity, a comedian, or just regular people. It's scary how accurate this one is. But it's really good. It makes for a really good story to show how just low Homer's getting, but it also makes for a lot of really good humor too with a lot of the jokes. But again, it is kind of hurt by the fact that yes, this stuff does happen almost exactly how they portray it. And the ending I do think is a little harsh on Groundskeeper Willie for coming to save the day, but it is another cautionary tale telling people that, yes, human nature is awful. We are always going to attack people and always make people look bad. We love the victim mentality. We love the whole good guy, bad guy world dynamic thing, but we need to overcome that. And I do like that episode's lesson, and I do love the humor. It just comes to a little bit of that caveat there where it's accurate to everything that's been happening so much. When I was younger, this one was alright for me. I just never really got a lot of the humor until I started learning about the celebrity culture and stuff and how this happens a lot. And then I started liking it a lot more. This is one of those that gets better and better every time you watch it, like Bart's Girlfriend. Those two, so far, are the two in this season that every time you watch it, you notice something else and it gets even better. So, what's next? Grandpa versus sexual inadequacy. Homer and Marge are having a little trouble in bed, so Grandpa creates his revitalizing sex life tonic, and then when it works, he and Homer decide to go out on the road and sell it. However, Grandpa starts getting a little too big for his britches, and then they end up fighting, and then it's revealed Homer was an accident. But as soon as Grandpa says that, he recants, and then he realizes he messed up, and he does everything he can to make it up to Homer, and then the two end up bonding. This is another one where it just changes tone abruptly, although this one is a lot more obvious. The first half is way, way, way more comedic than the second half. It's very joke-filled, but after Barney kind of leaves the plot once the replacement stuff is over, that's kind of where the humor leaves. Now granted, when they go to the Simpsons house and it's revealed Homer's an accident, that's where it starts changing. But that's when all the humor goes away. Now, the humor is good, but what really works in this one is the story. Because we actually see some Grandpa development. Up till this point, Grandpa, with the exception of Lady Bouvier's lover, has always just kind of been a joke character. And a little bit of a plot device. But we actually get to see him get some sort of development here. He really does care about Homer, even though he is a bit rough around the edges. And yes, he's not exactly the best father, never really was. But, you know, he still really does care about Homer, even though he is a little harsh. And yes, the part with him talking about, I had sex! That's all really funny, of course. But like I said, the humor is definitely paling in comparison to the story here. And it's such a weird bit that it just changes so abruptly. And it's weird that a lot of the episodes this season have that issue. And I bet this is the most time I've said sex in an episode so far, but we're not done yet. Fear of flying. After being banned from Moe's, Homer decides to go looking for a new bar, and then he ends up getting an airline bar, and then they mistake him for a pilot. He crashes a plane, and then they get free tickets to go anywhere they want except for Alaska and Hawaii, the freak states. But Marge is afraid of flying, as it turns out, but because she refuses to get treatment for it, she starts showing it in weird ways, starting to act crazier and crazier. And then she goes to therapy, where Homer freaks out because therapy seems to ruin families. But then we find out what happened to Marge's dad, sort of. This one is very overlooked. Very few people ever talk about this one. And that's a shame, because it has a lot of really good stuff in here, like the It's Raining Men stuff, the lesbian bar not having a fire exit, the cornfield sequence with Marge and her mom, everything with the therapist, all like the little stuff that they make against therapy and like little jabs at it. All of it really works. This is a very funny one. And of course we get a little bit of, I want to call it emotion, but I can't tell if it's a joke or not. So we find out that Marge's dad is actually a steward, or a stewardess, if you will. but I can't tell if they mean this as a genuine plot point or if it's more of a joke that she's overreacting from it. I don't know, but because of that, it kinda hurts it just a tiny bit, though. Not a whole lot. Although, yes, it does affect it a little bit. So, how does the rest of it hold up? Well, like I said, it's got a lot of really good funny stuff in here. Marge's absolute insanity is always fun to watch because she's probably the most level-headed right up there with Lisa. So, her being kinda insane, especially to this degree, is actually kind of fun to watch. And all Homer's failed attempts to try to get her to feel better, like, Marge, shouldn't you be baking? Or getting her these plane crash movies to make her feel better. All of it's really well done, and it really deserves to be talked a lot more about. And it's got a lot of guest stars, too. Anne Bancroft, Ted Danson, John Ratzenberger, and more. So, yeah. But I think I kind of know why this one was overshadowed. It was the last one to air during the year. It aired on the 18th of December, 1994. So it was kind of in the midst of the Christmas season, which usually, if it's not a Christmas special, the episode doesn't do as well. Which it actually did better than Grandpa vs. Sexual Inadequacy. But of course, at the time and now, it's always overshadowed by the one that came out the next time. Homer the Great. One of the most famous episodes of all time. Homer discovers that Lenny and Carl are part of some sort of secret organization called the Stonecutters, and Grandpa is also a member, so Homer can get in. And then, of course, Homer's just an absolute buffoon, but it turns out he's the chosen one, and then he's treated like a king, but then Lisa convinces him, maybe you need to do good. Maybe you should use your position of power to do good things. And Homer agrees, but the Stonecutters do not. They don't take very kindly to the way Homer's taking their society, so they decide to form the No Homers Club. Again. This is one of the funniest episodes of the whole show. Everyone loves this, and I'm right up there with them. First, the song, it's great, it's funny, and it's got a really nice tune. Patrick Stewart does an amazing job here as number one. Oh, what kind of name is number one? Hello, my name is number one. Like that, all those jokes like that. Homer is on point here. Everything he does is hilarious. With the monkey stuff, making fun of number one's name, using the parchment. There's also the stone of punishment, the stone of triumph. Everything in this is great. I can't think of a joke that doesn't work. And it's also got some good fan service. We see almost every male character in the reoccurring cast here. We see Quimby, we see Smithers, we see Burns, we see Troy McClure in the background somewhere. We see a lot of them because, well, the Stonecutters is some sort of secret organization. We also find out a little bit about Homer's childhood, is that he was one of the least popular kids at his school, and I feel really bad for him. Can't relate, but I do feel bad for him. This is another one of those perfect episodes that every time you watch it, it just gets better and better and better. What more can I say except it's Homer the Great, and it is great. Kind of a lame line to end out on, but oh well. And Maggie makes 3. The kids are watching too much TV, so the family decides to break out some photo albums. And there are no pictures of Maggie, so Homer decides to talk about when Maggie was conceived and about to be born. And yes, I do mean he talks about when she was conceived. Homer has a dream job at a bowling alley, and it provides just enough money to scrape by, but uh-oh, there's a new baby coming along. And it takes a while for Homer to realize it, but he kind of has to decide on whether or not he needs to actually stay at his dream job and be happy, or go back to Mr. Burns, who he's horribly disgraced, and make a living for his family. It's another one of those story episodes, but unlike the last one, this one actually intertwines the two. The humor and the story are going at the exact same pace and at the exact same time, so there's no abrupt transition with this one. It delves into both, especially that extremely sweet ending, but there's more than that. All of Homer's exaggerations to the story, all of Homer's little bits of not knowing that Marge is pregnant, and then of course there's also just Homer's kind of bleak acceptance that there's going to be another kid, but as soon as he sees her, everything gets better. It's another one of those episodes that just kind of does both angles that the Simpsons usually go for, and it does it really well. I, along with many people, consider this the part 3 of the flashback series stuff, because after this, the flashbacks starting to become a little much. They start to be a little derailment-ish, and they're kind of stretching for things to find to talk about. But I consider this very well done anyways. I mean, there's 3 episodes talking about how the kids were made, and, this is a very good one. Although I do prefer Lisa's first word and I married Marge to this one, I still consider this one very, very good. And very, very sweet. Bart's comment. So Bart goes to detention and then turns out that Skinner loves astronomy. Not astrology, astronomy. And Bart ends up discovering a comet while out there, but this comet's gonna hit Springfield. So this is basically the apocalypse story. Every show's gotta have their we're all gonna die soon story, and this is definitely theirs. And I do think it's good. Not great, but good. This is one of the weaker ones, I think, this season. Although it does have some really good one-liners here and there, it's significantly less memorable than a lot of the other stuff. That's not bad on this part. It's more that the other episodes in this season are just so good, spoiler alert, that it's all just kind of blown out of the water. Everything this one does, another episode this season alone does better. Now that's not bad. I mean, this one certainly is very good, and it is very likable. It's just not as memorable or as poignant as some of the others. But I'll still watch it here and there. It's still a good one. You can tell they had a lot of fun writing the apocalypse stuff. And actually, I kind of would have liked to see more of this. I kind of would have liked it to go on a little longer, to see even more characters' reactions like Lionel Hutz or Troy McClure. And I know they're both voiced by Phil Hartman, but I don't care. It's fun to see all the ways that people are handling this. But that's all I have to say about that. Homie the Clown. So Krusty decides to create a clown school so that more regional Krusties can pop up, and that way you can get more of that sweet money. Homer ends up becoming Krusty and looking almost identical to the original one because of the original plot that Homer was going to be Krusty. But he ends up going a little too far and gets rounded up with the mob, and then he and Krusty have to work together to save their lives or else Fat Tony's gonna kill him. Here we go with another strange episode. This one kind of has a weird story thing going. The first one sets it up that Homer's learning how to be a clown. The second part is just kind of no story. It's mostly just kind of Homer jumping around here and there doing clown stuff, kind of like Itchy and Scratchy Land. And it has the same effect. It's very, very funny, and it's the best part of the episode. Then the third part is where the action stuff comes in. This actually has a lot of parallels to Itchy and Scratchy Land in the story department. A foreshadowed thread at the end, the middle part just being a bunch of jokes about a certain subject, and this one being clowns. The first half being a lot of setup, but still a lot of funny setup, although I do think the setup in this one was a little funnier than in Itchy Scratchy Land, but the action was a little bit better in that one. But, of course, this one isn't really meant to have so much action as it is supposed to be comedy throughout. The parts where Ned gets shot, I think, is really funny. All of Krusty's bad gambling stuff, like betting against the Globetrotters, is great. Everything with the clown school is great. This episode, again, is just great throughout. I can't think of a single thing wrong with it. It's got so much humor to offer and is definitely a laugh-out-loud episode. It's a classic for good reason. Bart versus Australia. Bart tries to disprove the Coriolis effect, but ends up creating a sizable bill when he calls Australia. So Bart has to be flown down to Australia to go apologize, but it turns out to be some shadier stuff than expected. This one is alright. The first half is way better than the second. Like Homie the Clown before it, and of course Itchy and Scratchy Land, this has another similar plot device. It's set up, lots of random jokes about the subject, this time being Australia, and then the conflict. The conflict in this one, however, isn't that funny, and it is pretty weak, which kind of does dampen the rest of the episode. The setup and the Australia jokes are great, like how the Australians don't really know what beer is. It's just the third act is kind of weak. It's not that funny. And it stinks because the rest of the episode beforehand was still really good. It just kind of all falls apart at the end. Not bad, not even okay. It's good. And I'd put it like right under Bart's comment though, where it's good but not great. But unlike that one, it doesn't have a consistent tone or quality. This one starts off really good but kind of gets worse as it goes on. Which is a shame too, because this story has a lot of really good stuff to it, but it just doesn't really grab me as much. But the next one does. Homer vs. Patty and Selma, another one that people don't talk about, like Fear of Flying. What is it with the Bouvier stories in this one that people don't even talk about them? So, Homer invests in pumpkins, and then it ends up going bust. So he ends up making a deal with Patty and Selma that they'll repay his debt if he becomes their slave. And by slave, I mean, well, exactly that, slave. Only a lot more humiliated. This one was so easy to get wrong. There was so much going against it, like all the mean-spirited tones, Homer not fully deserving it, but it makes up for it in certain ways, like Homer being so diligent during this humiliation. He could easily overpower Patty and Selma, but it's very, very clear that he's got this drive and determination. This is more of that development we see with Homer. He really does care about his family, and he, for once, is willing to own up to his mistakes. Now, granted, looking back, this is almost out of character for him because of how little he actually decides to improve, but it's a lot more accepted here because it's so rare in these new episodes. But, oh well. Mel Brooks guest stars and he does a very good job, and it's really nice to see just how far Homer's willing to go to help his family, and he ends up sticking up for Patty and Selma in the end. And of course, Patty and Selma get their just desserts. I don't get why a lot of people don't talk about this one. I mean, it's not laugh out loud funny, but it does have some really good stuff in here, and it's got some good story and character development. It's a very good, well-rounded episode like Bart's Girlfriend, although not quite as good as that one. But I do think this one deserves to be talked about just a little more. Now we get to one of the most controversial episodes of the time, A Star is Burns. So this is a crossover with the show The Critic, and Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, wanted nothing to do with this episode. He hated it. He hated the script. He hated the concept of a crossover, so much so that he removed his name from the credits and refused to show up for the DVD commentary, and still refuses to talk about it to this day. So yeah, he's not a big fan of crossovers, huh? So I guess that's why when he left, Family Guy and Futurama got crossovers, huh? So Jay Sherman, the critic, comes to Springfield for a film festival, and then it's about him being him, and that's kind of it. And then at the very end, we get a plot about the film festival actually happening, with Barney having a beautiful film, Hans Moleman having a ridiculous film, and Mr. Burns trying to create a self-glorifying movie that would make everyone love him. That story happens about midway to 2/3 in. The rest of it is just kind of jokes about the critic, which is the reverse of Bart vs. Australia, where the first 2/3 aren't that great, but then the last third actually is. Funny how that works. But it's still good. It's nowhere near as bad as Matt Groening said, although, unlike what some of the people on board would say, I don't consider this one of the greats. Most people don't. It's fine. It's good. It's just, again, when you see the critic, you get more of the jokes. However, I have not. So, yeah, make of that what you will. The episode's still good, though. It's still watchable. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, aside from some of the weird plot meanderings. But it's still good overall, and it's still worth a shot. Come on, Matt. At least give it a chance. Lisa's Wedding, one of the most famous episodes because it's one of the first ones that looks into the future, not the past. And this episode had no idea the monster it would create. I'll talk about that when I'm done with the episode. So, a fortune teller tells Lisa about her future and how she would eventually find the love of her life. And then how Homer and Bart would proceed to embarrass her a lot, but then everything would end up just falling apart. The episode's kind of simple and stuff, but it's kind of muddled up a bit. At the time, it would be really, really good because, hey, this might actually be canon. But now that we've seen a bunch of alternate futures, this is just kind of one of those alternate future ones. But of the alternate future ones, this is easily the best. It's got some pretty decent heart and story, even though the heart and story until the end, when we get back to the present, doesn't really mean anything because we know that this probably isn't actually going to happen. But the humor is very good with all the robot jokes and the Tin Man stuff, as well as everyone being in the future. Like, Maggie is apparently a talkative girl, but we never hear her actually talk, and she has the pacifier as a necklace now. Bart is a construction worker. Homer is doing a bunch of really ridiculous odd jobs. Milhouse is actually Homer's boss. Everything works really well, and it's just a laugh a minute. Especially that Escalax joke. I don't know why, I just love it. But this one did create a monster, like I said, because there was just so many future episodes after this, and few, if any, were actually good. We'll talk about it when we get down the line, but just so you know, yeah, this one's the one that started it all. But this one was a good one to start it, because it was really good. Funny enough, though, for quite a while, the show started dipping in ratings. I don't know what happened, but after this episode, it went from 14 or 15 million to 11. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but keep in mind, that's a 3 million viewer difference. So, up until the final episode this season, the ratings started to decline a little. Which is funny, given what the final episode is. 2,001 greyhounds. Santa's little helper falls in love with another dog, and then they end up having 2,001 puppies. But they can't keep the puppies, and Mr. Burns ends up adopting them, and by adopting, I mean actually just stealing. But it turns out that he actually cares about them, except he doesn't, because he only likes one of them, the one that can stand up. The other ones he wants to make into a la Cruella de Vil. And of course we get that amazing song, see my vest, made from real gorilla chest. This one is a lot of fun too. There's a lot of animal jokes which they haven't made in a while, and there's a whole episode dedicated to it now. Santa's little helper's on point, all his puppies are hilarious, and of course the cat trying to get a bunch of attention is always great. We see just how much Bart and Lisa care about their pets. So a little bit more development here too, because we did get some stuff like Dog of Death and all, where we do see how much they care about Santa's little helper. But this is another little bit too, and another little bit with more comedy in it, so not as much story, but it definitely does help. Mr. Burns is great in this one. He's a perfect maniacal villain here. One of his best villain roles so far. The episode's just a lot of fun. It's got a lot of great jokes. It's another joke-a-minute one where if I talk about all the humor, I'm going to give everything away. But my favorite part, I don't know why, I just love the dog whisperer bit because, yeah, I don't buy it at all. Even in real life. The PTA disbands. So, Skinner decides to become really cheap with Springfield Elementary and starting to fall apart. The teachers decide to go on strike and make demands. In other words, make the school better! But that doesn't work, so they end up having to make all the townspeople become teachers, and this is the highlight of the episode. Seeing people like Jasper or Mo be teachers, it's all great, and they act exactly how you would expect them to. Everything in this middle part is on point. And then, of course, there's the end part where there's the rising action and all, and it's also very good. This is another episode that just has so many jokes in here where if I talk about it all, I'm just going to end up giving them all away. But this one sounds kind of ridiculous. All the Springfield people have to become teachers. Yeah, that sounds kind of weird. However, it actually works really well. It's one of those episodes with a strange concept, but it actually works. It just goes to show you that The Simpsons has such strong characters that you could put them in almost any scenario at first, and then make it just seem perfectly natural. Like I said, at first, because clearly this one must have had some sort of influence with the writers because this is all the episodes we get these days. But this one works out very well, and we get to see the dynamic between Edna and Skinner before Grade School Confidential comes up. Round Springfield, one of the most depressing episodes so far. Right up there with One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blowfish. I think that's what it's called. So, remember Bleeding Gums Murphy, Lisa's hero who taught her to stand up for herself and be happy and sing the blues and do jazz? Well, he's dying in the hospital, so let's start from the beginning. Bart goes to the hospital because he ends up eating the jagged metal Krusty-O that's found in the box of Krusty-Os. While he's getting treatment there, Lisa decides to roam around and finds that her hero is actually dying. They share one last song together, and he passes away, making him the first Simpsons character that has been previously established to die. And this is really impressive. I mean, granted, he was never the most prominent or most popular character, but this is a major change in the continuity of the show. He can't really come back. And this shows that the show has guts, and that it is willing to change the stuff around it. And that's more than any of the other episodic shows, even for adults, even the stuff on Fox. Very few animated shows have ever really done something like this, and The Simpsons wanted to do this to show that they were more than just a funny sitcom. They can have a lot more serious stories and change a lot of their show, and they did it very well here. The emotion is great here, with Lisa trying to cope with the loss of her hero, the one guy who understood her, really. And Bart doing everything he can to make her feel better, like all that lawsuit money, he ends up giving it to her so that she can commemorate his memory, because Springfield will not do it. The Jazzman song is easily the best part of this one. It's one of my favorite Simpsons songs ever, and I know it's not an original song to the show, but I love it. Yeardley Smith, surprisingly, has a very good singing voice. This is one of those great episodes. It's not laugh out loud funny, but it's definitely not supposed to be. The most dramatic episode of the whole season, and I think it's very good. And so did many other people too, because this is one of the most hailed episodes of the season. Although not very many people talk about it now, at the time it was very respected. but I think people need to watch it more. If you're going to watch a serious episode, I'd suggest this to be one of your first choices. The Springfield connection. Marge becomes a cop, and yeah, remember what I said about the PTA disbands? On how the characters are so strong you could put them in almost any scenario and then it works? This is one of those. Marge becomes a cop kind of sounds like a little bit of a fan fiction premise. But again, like Itchy and Scratchy Land or Homer the Great or all that kind of stuff, they take one central concept and then just make all the jokes they can about it. Now, unfortunately, this one does mark a return to the dreaded plot shift. In the last third, it actually does become a legitimate crime thriller, sort of, when it actually starts taking itself seriously. And it's not bad, it's just kind of different. It's good though, don't get me wrong. But what is weird is that this one wants to have multiple conflicts. Marge trying to fit in with the other cops. Marge trying to come into her own. Marge arresting Homer. Marge doing a crime bust. There's 4 plot points going on here, but they don't focus on any of them at once. They just abandon it to go on to the next one. But that's more of nitpicky, because when they do these plot points, they do them very well, and they're very enjoyable. They're always enjoyable to watch. I mean, it's The Simpsons, of course. It's not gonna lose all its humor one day, but that's not for right now. The episode is a lot of fun, and it's a simple kind of fun. Although there is that crime bust at the end that is a bit action-packed and pretty exciting, it does keep it more on the simple side, and it does definitely try to keep it more down to earth for such an outlandish concept. Lemon and Troy, another Bart episode, and one where we see some of Bart's developing character. So Bart doesn't really care about government or Springfield or anything, but in this one he ends up learning about having town pride. And this actually does kind of stay throughout the rest of the show here and there. They don't touch upon it a lot, but still. So the famous Springfield lemon tree is stolen, and then Bart and the kids decide to break into the rival town Shelbyville to go get it back. And the episode is just a whole bunch of good jokes on espionage and trying to get the tree back. It's all a lot of fun, and I love it, love it, love it. This has it all. It's got story, it's got character development, it's got action, it's got humor, it's got everything you could ever want. It's got the adults going on their own little mission and finding their doppelgangers in Shelbyville. We get to see more Shelbyville. I mean, we have seen it before here and there, but this is the first time we get a really good look at it. And how pretentious everyone is, and how much better everything is, although there is a sort of seedy underbelly tone going on there that they don't really touch on in this one, but they'll touch on later. There's a lot of really good subversion humor, like there's a lemon behind a lemon-shaped rock, and how easily Bart is able to fool the kids into thinking that he doesn't go to school. Everything in this is on point, and I love it to pieces. It's definitely one of the contenders for the best episode this season. But now we get to the last episode of the season, Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1. Yeah, Part 2 aired a year later. And right here we get to the controversial bit, because this drove everyone nuts. So there were actually gambling rings in Vegas on who shot Mr. Burns. People were desperately trying to figure out who it was, who could have done such a thing. Actual legal rings were created in Vegas. This was going crazy, and people were just losing their minds, waiting a whole year for this stuff to happen. And in fact, many alternate endings, 2 in particular, but there were also a couple others that were made in case one of the people on board decided to break the non-disclosure agreement. This whole thing is crazy. And the episode is very good too. Granted, Mr. Burns gets shot in the last minute, but the whole thing is set up for this. Mr. Burns decides to block out the sun so that everyone will be relying on nuclear power 24/7. Now let's ignore how bad this would be for the environment and just focus on Mr. Burns being evil here. This is the most evil Mr. Burns has ever been, and he is basically a supervillain here, and it's great. And even Smithers, the one who is just so obsessed with Mr. Burns, he even decides that this is too much and jumps ship. Everything works here, the humor, and definitely the story. The story is a lot, really, really well done, that I even stuttered right there. But the thing is, it's kind of a companion piece to number 2, because, yeah, if you just watch it on its own, there's a lot of missing stuff here. You can kind of tell the ending was a little overblown too because of how overhyped it was. What happens? Was it a payoff? Why is it so controversial? Well, we'll get to that in the next one. That was Season 6, everybody! Yeah, it kind of ended off on such an abrupt note, but okay. What are my favorites and least favorites? Well, I'll tell you my least favorite right away was another Simpsons clip show being the only episode this season that I didn't really like. And I already explained why. It's kind of lazy, it's unneeded, and the theming was just kind of arbitrary. But what's my favorite one? Well, it was originally Homer Badman until I really got thinking. And then there were two that were at the top, and I know I can't pick two. So I'm going to give the honorable mentions when it's over, but it's hard, and this one might be a bit of a controversial pick, but I think Lemon of Troy is actually going to be my favorite of this season. I know Round Springfield and Homer the Great, those ones are considered some of the best, but I don't know, this one just has it all. It's another one of those where you watch it every time and it gets better and better. Because this is a lot of background humor, a lot of stuff in the background you're going to have to pick up on. I highly suggest watching it, but what are the honorable mentions? Well, let me tell you. Sideshow Bob Roberts, Treehouse of Horror 5, Homer Badman, Homer the Great, and Round Springfield. Those are definitely the best ones. Now, there are some things we can notice here. A lot of memes and a lot of the most famous quotes have originated from this season. It definitely was very influential in that regard. Also, there's a lot of tone shifts and a lot of plot shifts here. I don't know why, but maybe they really want to do a lot of exploring here and they were just so pressed for time that they kind of had to make a lot of abrupt changes. I don't know, but I think it's kind of weird. And also, there's, of course, those episodes where the middle is just a bunch of random jokes and the beginning is a bunch of setup, and then the last part is a climax, which, that's not bad, it's just something I kind of noticed. So how is this season overall? Well, not quite as good as the last one. I'd definitely say this is the second best so far, and it's only paling in comparison to Season 5 by a very slight bit. So I'd still give it the Archibald seal of approval. Alright guys, you ready for Season 7? I know I am. Alright, tune in next time.
Good night, everybody.